We're going on now with 1.2, operations with real numbers, absolute value, order, addition, subtraction, and opposites, multiplication, division, and reciprocals. Now, much of this is still basic algebra functions with a lot of arithmetic. We'll start off by looking at absolute value. When we have two vertical lines with something in between, that's read the absolute value of A, where A is some point along the number line. So here is a number line, and here we see a 1, a 2, and a 3, and there a -1, a -2, a -3. Now, we often say that the absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So what are the number of units that a -3 is from 0? Well, it's 1, 2, 3 units. So we say the absolute value of -3 is 3. And how far is a +3 from 0? Well, 1, 2, 3. So the absolute value of a +3 is also 3 units from 0. So by definition, we say the absolute value of something is its distance, and it's always going to be positive from 0. So that's what we define. So now let's take a look at some examples. So in example A, a -3.4 is this many units from 0. The absolute value of 0 is 0, and the absolute value of 17 is 17. So the absolute value of any number is always going to be its positive value. Now, again, a number line is in order here. So when we are defining order, anything to the right on a number line is going to be greater than anything to the left, which will be less. So we say that a +1 is greater than a -1. We say a -3 is less than a -2. So anything to the right on a number line is going to be greater than anything to the left. So this is what we need to visualize when we're doing this. Let's look at some examples. So -8 is over to the left, -4 is to the right. So we say -8 is less than -4. That's true. Now, -6 is to the left of a -3. Here they're saying that a -6 is greater. So this is false. Now, what we're going to do here is give you the rules for adding two real numbers. Now, remember, real numbers are signed often. That is, if it's positive, it doesn't have a sign, but if it's negative, it does. So what are the rules? Well, if they're both positive numbers, you just add them in a traditional way, and the result is positive. How about if they're both negative numbers? Again, add them the traditional way, And you could use, if you'd like, their absolute value, and the answer will be negative. So if they're both negative, -3, -4, just add them as 3 and 4 gets 7, and you apply the negative sign. Now, when you are adding one that is negative and one that is positive, there's a certain rule, and I will go over this with you. Here it is stated. I'm not going to read it to you, but I will show you the example of it. And one number is 0, then the sum is whatever the other number is. So 3 plus 0 will be 3, the other number. All right, so let's take a look at these. Now here, this one is negative, and this one is positive. So the rule is you take the absolute value of the smaller number, which is this, subtracted from the absolute value of the larger number, which is that, and this is going to give you get a pen here, 0.8. Now you apply the sign of the larger absolute value, which is negative in this case. So the answer here is a negative 0.8. Now here we have two negative signs, so we're just going to treat these as if they were positive. This is going to be 23. And since they're both negative, we just apply the negative sign. Now since this one's the larger absolute value, we're just going to subtract the smaller. And 7 from this gives me a 17. And the sign of the larger absolute value is positive. So we just leave it this way. All right, let's check our work. So as we said, this was a negative 28. I'm sorry, a negative 0.8. This was a negative 23. And this was 17. Now we have also a law of opposites, which states for any two numbers, if one is positive and the other is negative, and it's the same value in a sense, when you add opposites, the sum is 0. So the sum of two opposites is 0. So what's the opposite of a 3.5? Well, a negative 3.5. And 0 is itself 0. And the opposite of a fraction, that's negative, is it's positive. So that when you add these together, the results will be a 0. Now, the absolute value. When x is a non-negative, the absolute value of x is the positive value. When x is negative, the absolute value of x is the opposite, that is, its positive value. We've gone over this already. Okay, we're now going to take a look at subtraction. How do we know this is subtraction? Well, this is a negative number, and the second one, we can think of that as a negative also, but we could also think of this as subtraction. One of the things we sometimes do in algebra is change something from subtraction to addition by putting a plus right there and then putting the second term in parentheses. So really what we're doing is we're adding two negative terms. So this will be then a negative 7.4. Or just take their positive values, add it, and you're going to apply the negative sign. Now, this is interesting here. How do we know that B is subtraction? Well, because of the negative sign there. So we're saying subtract. But whenever we find that we have two negatives like this, we can read this negative sign as the opposite of a negative 18. What is the opposite of a negative 18? Well, it's a positive 18. We also have the rule where we say two negatives like this give you a positive. So this is going to be 14 as we subtract 4 from a positive 18. Now, when we are subtracting fractions, we need to go back into our pre-algebra days. In order to subtract a fraction, we must have a common denominator. So between a 9 and a 5, our common denominator is going to be 45. Now, in order to work with these, I have to get this 9 to become a 45. I'm going to do so by multiplying it by 5. Now, in order to do that and keep it equivalent, I must multiply the numerator by 5 also. 5 over 5 is 1. I'm allowed to multiply anything by 1 without changing its value. But the one I'm choosing here now is 5 over 5. So this now becomes 35. My bottom is 45. And to make this one a 45, I have to multiply it by 9. But 9 over 9 is 1. So this now becomes a negative 18. So when I do this subtraction, 35 minus 18 is going to give me 17 over 45. And they kind of slip this in here, this subtracting of fractions. If this is a weak area, it may be something you'll need extra practice on. And I have some examples in additional exercises as well as in the practice you'll be doing. So there's the first one. There's the second one. And there's the third one. Now, in multiplication and division of two real numbers, here it doesn't really make any difference whether they are common denominators or not. And we want to cross cancel and simplify wherever we can. And we need to work with the signs a little bit as well. For instance, if they are unlike signs, that is, one is positive and one is negative, whether you're dividing or multiplying, the results will be negative. So unlike signs, negative. Now, if you have the same signs, that is, you're dividing two negatives or two positives, or multiplying two negatives, multiplying two positives, the signs are the same, then the results will be positive. So one of the advice that you might follow is work on the signs first. And that's what I'll do here. For instance, what will this be? Well, this is going to be positive. Now, you don't have to write a positive, but at least it lets you know that we've worked on it. This will be a positive. How about this one? This is going to be a negative because one is positive, one is negative. Here we have two negatives, so the result will be positive. Again, one negative, one positive, so the results will be negative. If you work the signs first, now you don't have to worry about the signs. So 8 times 3 is 24. We can't cross-cancel anywhere. We know the answer is going to be negative, so this is going to be 7/20. And here we know the results are going to be positive, and 16 divided by 4 is 4. And we know this is going to be negative, and 5 goes in the 75 15 times. And you can check some of this with your calculator if needed. And there's your positive 24. Notice if it's positive, you don't write the answer, but you can write it in your work just so you know it's you've worked the signs. Okay, now when you are signing fractions, where do you put the negative sign? Well, actually, there's 3 places to put it. You could have it in the numerator, you could have it in the denominator, but the preferred way is to have it near the fraction bar. Okay, both of these are correct. Preferred way is this way. Now, the law of reciprocals. By definition, as long as it's not 0, the reciprocal of a number, and keep in mind that we said earlier every number has a 1 underneath it. So the reciprocal of a number, if it's like a whole number here, is over 1. Just take it and flip it. That is, take its reciprocal, just flipping the number. So now the a's cancel out through cross canceling, and you end up with 1 over 1, which is 1. And the key is the product of any reciprocal is 1. So let's look at some examples. What's the reciprocal of 5/9? Well, 9 over 5. What's the reciprocal of a negative 5? Remember, it's over 1. Well, it will be 1, a negative 1 over 5. Again, when you multiply, it has to come to a positive. Okay, another rule that we're going to mention here is division by 0. In our mathematical system, we have never defined this. So, anytime you find that you are dividing a real number other than 0 by 0, the answer is it's undefined. And you don't see this often, but here it is. If you divide 0 by 0, this is not undefined, it's indeterminate. So there's a new one that you'll run into. Anything divided by 0, as long as it's not 0, is undefined. But 0 divided by 0 is indeterminate. So these will be some that you're going to just have to memorize. All right, we had done this earlier. We're now going to simplify this. And let's just do this together step by step. So here we have a negative 2. We'll keep that. We're going to square a negative 3. Well, negative 3 times negative 3 is a positive 9. So this now becomes a positive 9. Minus 12 divided by 4. Well, this is going to be a negative 3. Remember, we're doing our division as we come to it, and then now this multiplication. Now, we do this multiplication, we end up with a negative 12. What's the opposite of a negative 12? Well, a positive 12. So now we have, this is going to be a negative 18, a negative 3, and a positive 12. So a negative 18, a negative 3 gives us a negative 21, plus 12 gives us a negative 9. Again, you're showing enough work to support your answer. And there we go. All right, how about this one? A little more challenging. So I paused it to work it a little bit. So 6 plus 2 is 8. And 4 times 8 is 32. 8 minus 3 is 5. 8 times 5 is 40. This is a 2. 6 times 2 is 12. And now here this is tricky. The only thing that's squared here is the 2, not the negative. So this is a negative 4. This is a spot you need to be careful of. It's a little tricky. And that will be 12 minus 4 is 8. So 72 divided by 8 is 9. Okay. And there we go. Okay, that'll wrap this up, and not too long.